where's the real business need? The real business need is to add attributes to entities. That's the really important thing. So let's take a look at, start to take a look at least at what that might look like. Attribute management. Yeah, this is the good stuff. All right. Creating attributes, customizing attributes. That's what we do. Okay, so let's look a little bit more into the attribute structure. So might have an attribute ID, oh, and an entity type ID. So a connection there between attribute and entity. So we have an attribute code and some class for that attribute. All right? So far, so good. Now, the backend model and the backend type. So a backend model, again, that's where we would have validation or any kind of conversion information or conversion functionality that we need when we receive the data from the model and want to put it into storage. That's backend models. Backend type merely specifies where we're going to store that data. So for a catalog product entity, some attribute with a backend type of varchar, that would end up in catalog product entity varchar. That's all backend type is. Backend, in the backend table would be some alternate storage table for that. By default, you know, these vars and integers and so those are all handled for us, okay? If we specify a certain backend type. But we can also specify alternate backend tables. If you've ever had to deal with product image galleries, that's how that works. For the front end, we can specify a front end model. So this would be used to make sense of whatever information we're pulling from our database. We can specify an input type. This would be used to administer slash how we display the option to administer this thing. So a select box, for example, or a multi-select, or text. Front end label. So obviously some. What do we call that? And then front-end class, I believe, a CSS class. So when used in rendering. So, yeah. Is required. Guess what that does? 1 or 0. EAV config. So with attributes, remember I was talking about when we could get the attribute through our entity model? Well, okay, that's really cool because what that gives us access to, again, is that whole meta environment around that attribute. Basically, that entire attribute's modeling. And that's EAV config. And this is actually represented under Mage EAV. All right? So EAV config gives us, is the meta environment, and then from that, we actually also have the actual descriptions and the information about each of the attributes themselves. So again, attributes are their whole individual kind of entity, and they have their whole community of themselves inside inside of Magento. So, but that, you know, therein ends the modeling complexity of Magento. So, get attribute. Entity type, attribute code. So we'd specify catalog product, for example, and the attribute that we want to get. So this we could do anywhere. To find out information about this price attribute, Mage get singleton, EAV config, get attribute, specify a product type, or we can also again just simply use that entity and get the attribute. Let's see, get any type code. All right, and we can also, I don't know why that's there. All right, so as a refresher, our standard attribute types. So these are available to us, and they have storage already mapped for us. Varchar, text, int, decimal, and date time. Okay. So now let's start talking about EAV setup. So we just looked at core resource setup, and the EAV entity setup extends from core setup and gives us some more functions to deal with the attribute system. So yeah, extends core resource setup, and exactly what I just said right here. Gives us gives us what we need to add and update, remove attributes from entities. So we specify the entity type code, we specify the code for the attribute, and then we specify an array of information. Now, I don't know if there's a note on this slide or not in your book, but okay, yeah, I'll explain this next here. The problem is these values here, these indices, they are passed through a function when you call add attribute that aliases them. When you use update attribute, they're not passed through that. So that's one of the big gotchas with working with attributes. So we'll look at that on the next slide. One note here: sort order, it's never evaluated. Oh well. Prepare values. So add attribute runs through prepare values. So why? I couldn't tell you. So in this case, if I want to, let me see, I don't think type. So if I wanted to set whether or not an attribute is filterable. So this would be for catalog product entity. I was adding an attribute to the catalog product entity, and I wanted to set the is filterable. This is the column name, by the way. And this information is stored in an additional table, catalog product attributes, I believe. Catalog. Is that in here, or am I thinking of something else? Oh, I'm sorry, catalog EAV attribute. Here we have all of this additional information. So this is additional meta information about these attributes, but only as it pertains to the catalog EAV entities. So, and you can see that a lot of this stuff is probably, administered through that Manage Attributes panel. But you can also update this.
This is like an extension of the whole
of the EAV. Basically, it's an extension of the EAV attributes table because that has some meta information, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it also has, now we need more meta information, but only in the context of catalog products or catalog entities.
Yes.
So that's why it's separated out here. Now, the gotcha is, if I'm using add attribute, I have to specify filter as an index, or filterable as an index. But if I were using update attribute, I would have to specify is filterable, is underscore filterable. I think they did that just to mess with us. I don't know why it's this way. I honestly could not tell you why. Add attribute, if you're using that, look in here to figure out what index you should use, what your index value should be. And then update attribute, you just can simply use the column name. So add attribute to product. So here we go. This would be an upgrade script or an install script. Installer equals this, so we alias again. Installer start setup, and then we simply here we're just to keep this nice and readable. We're building out our array, so type, varchar. We're leaving these out, specifying a label, an input type, and we're not using any kind of custom source models or anything. We are specifying, visible on front, unique, user defined. I believe, Sivan, user defined.
Yeah, which is, I think, is user defined obviously.
Yes, so default, unique, visible in front. Okay, so we do this, and then we specify our entity code, the attribute code, and then this array. And we have installed an attribute for our entity. I actually didn't build this. Okay? Yeah. Pretty easy. Quick little note on attribute models. So, back-end models, save, load, delete, yeah, with an attribute value, okay? So, this is where we are going to storage, all right? Into and out of storage. Source models, all right? Select and multi-select attributes, yes. So here is how we would specify certain options, and we'll be creating one of these tomorrow, actually, as part of our admin HTML exercise. So how do you get a drop-down with your list of options and then store that information in the database? So, custom source model. And there are other source models that exist already. Front end. Well, for rendering attribute on the front end. So how do we get this attribute value and present it to the world through front end models? So these are the three flavors of model that back up an attribute. So back end models. You can look in the code and see these. And we can look at these under Mage, EAV, model, entity, attribute, and here we have backend, front end, and source. Aha! Backend models, attribute, array. Oh, look at all the fun things these do. So, oh, here's that before save that we saw earlier. Take that array and implode it with a comma, of course. Here's our front-end models. Not as many of those. Generally, we'll implement this default, which is extending from the abstract, which is implementing the interface. Now, let's see. Yeah, but here we can get all sorts of good stuff, and we'll look at using this, in a practical example a little later on, probably tomorrow. And then source models. Source models are great. I mean, the ability to have that custom drop-down of options. So if you make custom transactional emails, how do those then show up in other drop-downs and configuration? Well, it's all through source models. Probably the greatest example of if you need to make a source model, just open up Boolean. And that's what you need to do, is get all options, specify something here. Yes, no, and the values that they correspond to.
Of course, that can be dynamic too, right?
Yeah, you could, exactly, and that's how, for example, the custom email templates work. Now, the interesting thing here, though, is how do you get your attributes to store in the flat column if it's got some kind of custom source? If you want it in those flat catalog product table, for example. Well, you have to implement these methods. So I was describing this earlier. Here we have get flat columns with no n. It could be in Cyrillic. I mean, we're all pretty lucky. But here you can see what we're doing is we're specifying, hey, this looks a lot like what we would be doing with SQL. So we're just providing an array of what ultimately becomes SQL instructions so that the system can actually add our column to that flat table. And that's all we have to do here. So you can always, this is a fantastic model to look at if you need a custom source model. Increments, so like order IDs, for example. Those operate through these increment models. And those are actually, let's see, you can find that information in EAV Entity Store. So yeah, it's certainly possible to customize those order numbers. This is what's happening for these increment entities and attributes, and you certainly, of course, don't need to know this flowchart. But basically, that always assumes that there's this table here where we're keeping in it basically a marker for where we are in terms of our increment values, and it's stored per store scope. Okay. This is a bit deep of a delving. And there's this fetch new increment ID method that does this. So if you're, here now you see though what's going on. So you get your pad length, pad character, for example. All right, so that's why by default, with your store codes, if you have multiple stores in your system, you'll have, it basically is store code, the store ID with some amount of padding to create, maybe like a 9-integer number, and then an incrementing ID on the right. Let's see. So for front end, now, if I wanted to get the front end model, the value for an attribute, I would need to get that attribute's EAV config, or that attribute model, call front end, and then call get value. Now this is for the catalog. I'd have to pass in the product object into get value. This is a bit clunky, but this is just simply how the front end models work through the attribute. Source models, you can pull those values from a table if you specify the backend table. You can pull them through basically expose this through your get all options method in your source model. There's the table model. Well, there's a table model that gives us access to get those attributes out of the table, out of table storage. There's the possibility to get those out of configuration values, and there's the Boolean that I showed you. So you can actually investigate each of these classes and see how those work internally. We will be dealing with, we'll be customizing based on the Boolean source model tomorrow. And real quickly, because I had nowhere else to put it, the option structure. Well, you've got your EAV attribute, and then, all right, attribute option value. That's this funky connection here, and then we actually store. We'll actually, based on what we have, we'll store this value in entity integer or the entity varchar table. Okay, that's that funky comma separated deal. We have several exercises to do. In this case, let's see, we're going to create an attribute from the admin and add it to the default attribute set. Check that it appears on a product edit page. Oh, okay. Well, that's really simple. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily have to take this course to be able to do this. So what does this look like? Well, in the admin, it would look like. So, catalog, attributes, manage attributes. Add new attribute. So this is the customer, your client, your boss, your store owner. This is their interface to add attributes to the catalog product entity in the system. Of course, this is possible because we have this entire meta environment for attributes. So, well, we'll add, let's see, an attribute code. So, some code. attribute codes are always going to be lowercase and underscored. That's it. Can declare the scope. So it's either going to be global, website, or store. In fact, yes. Okay. So remember yesterday I was saying that we have this nice Boolean is global, and it has 3 possible values. But this is where it is. So scope. So you can see that probably the website scope came after. So we have 0 is the store view, and then global, of course, is global. So that's the nice Boolean. And then along came Poly, the website, and so we have 2. So don't freak out if you see 2 in an is global column. So, but again, that's nice because obviously if something is persistent, no matter, regardless of the locale or something, you could just set global there and you would never have to worry about scoping it. But obviously if you would need to change it based on the website or store, this is where you do it. All right, so here we can choose our front-end input. Remember that from yesterday? And that's the nice thing, by the way, in the admin. You can inspect these fields and actually see the column names. So in this case, front-end input. All right. Values required. Ooh, input validation for store owner. Ah, I wonder what this does. There's that front-end class. There's that CSS class. So what that does is that attaches different CSS classes to our attribute, and those are actually used when the attribute's rendered, when we're rendering a form control, and then JavaScript picks up on those, and we have some kind of basically client-side validation. Okay, so I've shown you the screen now, so let's walk through doing this. Okay, so we need to add it to the default attribute set. Check that it appears on the product edit page. All right, so I will say, let's see, we'll do a text field. I'll make it global, and I'll give it some name for the admin. Some field, all right? Save and continue. Oh, now I have to go to my index management screen and refresh that catalog search index. Oh, I don't think I had it set. Okay, so now I'll go to the product, I'll go to create a new product, and obviously I'm going to add this to the default attribute set, right? So if I were going to, if I wanted to see that, I could look at default product type, and I have here a very cheap Ben product. It's $1, it's a deal. All right. All right, so I don't see it here. And I'm not going to see it anywhere here because I'll have to take that attribute and add it to the set. All right. Should be. Am I not seeing it? Oh, there we go. Missing a form control. Okay, so over here I have each of these folders again. So remember the diagram where we had kind of attributes and entities and then attribute sets and attribute groups? So right now we're in the default attribute set, and inside this set we have groups. And groups are really just an organization of attributes. And these, when they're rendered, the form controls, these are rendered out into different tabs or different areas. So I'd like to have mine just in the general, so I can just drag it over here, and it's important to me, so I'll add it right after SKU. That's odd. So, hoping this is saved. It might be time to rebuild my laptop.
It's wrong.
Ah, interesting. Caught my message here instead of here. All right, so, hey, look, there's some field. So in some field, I can have some value. All right, so now I need to find this product.
Pens product.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just search for this in the front end.
We need to go to pens product.
There we go. Huh. Don't see it here.
I think when you set the attribute,
So, I'll have to manage my attributes and change that attribute to visible in the front end.
right. And then the last one. Some code. Front end of property.
Comparable on front end? No. Let's see. Used in product listing. Well, that would be the.
Visible and product view page.
That would, yeah, used in product listing would be if I wanted to add this attribute to the grid, so in a category view, then I would actually have to adjust the category grid view though, so I would actually have to add this attribute, a call to call this value in there, in the product listing. So, visible on product view on front end. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I can do this.
So you will see.
And probably we'll need to refresh my cache here. Oh, and all of a sudden this additional information tab popped up. And I have some field, some value. Okay? So some of you have seen this. It's really like, oh yeah, I've been there, done that. So that is an administrative interface for adding attributes just to catalog product entities. So that's the first example. Now, let's do the same thing, but let's do it programmatically. An upgrade script. That's the fun stuff. So if I go in, we can look at a couple different places here. So let's see. Entities. Is that in here? Product collection attributes. So, yeah, you can add it by configuration. Yeah. So, as far as creating attributes from an upgrade script, well, what would that look like? Well, okay, we'll need two things open to do this. We'll need our module configuration, and then we'll also need to make some migration file. So let me see, I'm at version 2.5 now. So I'm going to create a new file, MySQL4-upgrade, and 0.2.5, I'll go to 0.2.6.php. So, because we're good Magento developers, we do this. And let's see. Because I'm a lazy developer, I'm going to do... Actually, no. Okay, so that was going to be my first mistake. I'm dealing here with my modules setup resource, right? Which right now is MageCore resource setup. So I actually need, if I'm going to work with the catalog objects, though, I need to use a different class. Okay? So I need to use the catalog setup resource class. And the reason is because that has all sorts of different machinery that I would need to work with the category objects or catalog objects. So in this case, I'm going to get the setup model for the category or for the catalog, and I have to pass in this connection here. So we're familiar with this call, get resource model. So I'm just collecting this, or getting the catalog resource model setup class. So the other argument here, which we haven't seen yet, that simply just gets passed to the constructor. Okay. So then we do what we always do, and we start setup. All right? And now here's where we deviate from using SQL. So what we're going to do, we're going to add an attribute to the system. So I'm going to type really fast here. Everybody blink. I'm sorry. We were content to type these for like the first 4 or 5 lessons, but now I'll do this here. So let's walk through this. I'm going to make you guys type a little bit today, but I'll give you a break later. So things to remember. It's just this big associative array. So here, setting up a label, specifying the type all right? And then our front-end input. So if you recall, the column names for these are different from what we're using here, and that's because add attribute is using prepare values. So in this case, all right, what else am I doing? Well, obviously I'm making it not required. Otherwise, when I'm editing this, editing a product, for example, I would have to supply a value for this. This can be an annoying thing to do to users, is to make a required value for products without then populating that attribute, so that anytime they go in to save a product again, all of a sudden they're going to have to go into some other tab and enter information. So user defined. So this is basically saying that I am making this myself, and I want to add it to the price group. Okay? Look at that in a second.
Also, I think that was where it prevents people from even touching it.
Exactly. So, and then down here, I'm supplying some options. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually specifying different scopes. So, what would you do? I mean, obviously, my recommendation, if you have to add an attribute, I would look long and hard through setup scripts and find something analogous going on. I mean, no sense to have to totally recreate the structure. All right, so then we need one more line in order to actually get this to work. Well, we have to see. All we've done here is just make this nice and neat. And then, then we just need to add attribute. Okay? And then installer and setup. So how do we get this to work? Well, I've got 0.2.5 to 0.2.6, so I just need to adjust my version number, and then I just simply need to hit my site. In fact, all right, so there we go. Nothing here, but let's see. Oh, why isn't it there? Well, let's see.
No, you need to check the attribute. Global attribute.
Yeah, the attribute.
You
Yeah, but I added it to a group.
How do you do? How do you attribute set? You can do set.
Well, let's go find it. There's nothing more awesome than examples that don't work. We call those real-world examples.
Group price. Should be in price.
Is the code that we pass to the add attribute, attribute underscore solved, is that the code?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. What's the attribute name?
Attribute underscore installed. So, let me see. I guess the next thing I'll do is I'll probably look in the database and see if it was added there.
Attribute
Yeah.
underscore install.
And where would I go to find this attribute?
Define price as a group.
I don't see an attribute set in the data array in that. Shouldn't be, without that, shouldn't be,
It's possible.
I don't see it.
Let's see. Well, there's my attribute install. Okay, so that made it in there. Okay.
Yeah.
After some code, so okay, so I just installed this. So that part of it worked. Well, shoot. Did you guys all have the same error?
Let's see.
So yeah, let's go and look. Prices.
Price.
Oh, there's this price here at the bottom.
Ah, boy.
Boy, how do we? Well, how would we fix that? Well,
Yeah,
who feels like making another upgrade script?
oh,
So this is you release it into the wild, and then you get the customer feedback. Oh boy, this didn't work. So well, no problem. You just patch it with another upgrade script, or you just say, hey, drag it up here. So you see what happened was we just created a group that didn't exist, added our attribute to that group, and those are just edited right here. Yeah. So when this tabs panel on the left, and of course we'll be looking at all this admin HTML later, this tabs panel on the left is built out, just simply inspects the groups from this product's attribute set and renders all those groups in tabs. That's how that maps out. So here we have our script-generated multi-select option. So multi-select is such a horrible form control. All right, so some label 1, some label 2. Okay, save that. Now, let's say time for another upgrade script, because this didn't work. This isn't saving, so we're missing something. And what we're missing is the correct storage backend for it. Okay? And what that looks like is another upgrade script. And I'll go 2.7 to 2.8. And I'll type very quickly. So here I'm going to do a few different things because I want to use the correct backend model to save this. So I need to take those multi-select options and handle them through Mage EAV model entity attribute backend array. So these are our attribute models, right? And then I'm going to specify a custom front-end model. So I can affect how this is rendered. Actually, before I do, I'll do this in another script. And then I'm also going to say, well, I'll do these other two separately. In this case, I said I went and tested my attribute, and I didn't test it before I shipped, and oh man, I forgot to set the backend. So what I would do would be this. Now I'm going from 2.7 to 2.8 here. So I will need to increment accordingly. Wow, I have to apologize for the speed of my machine. Okay, well that's better. Ta-da. All right. As an apology, I'll get you guys lunch today. Now this works. So again, what happened? Well, multi-selects, they have to go through a specific backend model in order to get into storage. And what we did with the script was supply the correct backend model, this EAV entity attribute backend array. And of course, that's going to be instantiated via the factory method, so you can actually look at this class and see what it's doing, if you like. All right? So here is so for those of you who are installing these scripts in your environment, are you finding them to work? All right, so everyone should have multi-select now. So customize the views. So what would that look like? Well, that means we're going to need a front end. But first, let's see what this looks like in the front end right now. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, that's not going to work because I need to do another. Well, it's not showing up at all because I need to do another upgrade script. So let's see. So I'll go up to 2.9. And, okay, all this information stays the same, but instead of backend model, let's see, I want it to be visible in the front. Let's see, what does that look like? Well, how do I find that out? Let's see. Probably if I go to catalog EAV attributes. See, global is visible, searchable, filterable, comparable, visible on front. So is visible on front, and I can just give change my version number. Hey! Great.
I like that.
No kidding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, very quick and easy change. So this, I like this Alt1 and this Alt3. So if I change this to German, from German to English. Oh, some label 1, some label 3. Huh. Scoped data. And that was that structure that we had defined here. I think here. Yeah. So, yeah, these IDs are just the store IDs. So that's how you could even set. Multi-language install and run. Okay. So then the last thing is we don't like this. So the boss says, well, hey, this was great. This was great, but that comma separated thing looks awful, you know? I want that to be a nice list. Well, okay. Wish we'd known that before we started making this module, but that's okay. We can fix it with an upgrade script. So, a couple of things that we'll need to do here. Let's see. Well, first we'll make yet another upgrade script. Oops. And I'm going to go from 2.9 to 2.9.1 because I'm not ready for a 0.3. And all of that stays the same, but this time I'm going to do two things here. So here is where I'm going to change this to be to use a different class for front-end rendering, okay? And but just this attribute. So that's the nice thing is I'm not changing this for other multi-select attributes. I'm just changing it for this. And then I'm going to also have to set something here because we want a list. So that means we're going to have to render with HTML. I have to set is HTML allowed on front to be true. And of course, these just apply to the catalog entities. All right? So, well, my next step, I'm probably going to want to create this class here. So, training, entity, attribute, front-end list. And where would that go? Well, it's a model. So under training animal model, I'll need to make entity, attribute, and front end. And a list dot Okay, so here's the gist. Here's what you'll use as a programmer. Take you just need to get value. Okay. So first we check and see that because this may actually be used for something else. First we want to make sure that we're grabbing a multi-select. Okay. So then we check to see, we'll be very safe and check to see that we have an array of options, or I'm sorry, array of values, and then we just build an output string. And then return the value. So if we don't have a multi-select, well, we'll just return the parent class. Cool. So that's good. Now all we have to do is refresh. Oh, did I didn't iterate my version, did I? And look at that. So the reset CSS for Magento, that actually removes the standard bullets that you see for HTML lists. So that's that. So, does anyone have any questions? I mean, I do hope that as we're working through this example, I mean, other than just me sitting here showing you how this works and what this workflow looks like, that you can think of, you know, how this would apply in your work. I mean, what we're doing here is exactly what you would do if you have some sort of you know, an attribute that you need to add to an entity. This is exactly the same workflow you would go through. So we've kind of had to deal with the back-end models and the front-end models. Back-end's for our storage, front-end for our rendering, and we'll touch on source models when we get into admin HTML. So, okay. So there is this exercise 6, but really we kind of developed this entire exercise to sort of encapsulate all of these. In fact, 5 and 6 are bonuses. So, you're welcome.